The dawn was cool, but the air in Umudike was thick with tension. The whispers that had once danced on the edges of conversations now swirled openly in the marketplace and under the iroko tree where the elders gathered. Adaobi's defiance, her unshakable will, had become the talk of the village. Yet, where there was admiration, there was also fear, stoked and fed by Chief Aguba's relentless campaign to discredit her. She went to the forest to speak with spirits, some said. They say she's cursed, and she's brought that curse to us all, others added. Aguba's voice rose above the din, amplified by his wealth and influence. His scheming had taken on a new edge. If he couldn't silence Adaobi through force, he would turn the village against her entirely. And so, the seeds of an accusation were sown. Nwaifa, Aguba's loyal lieutenant, made his rounds in the marketplace that morning. With each transaction, each whispered exchange, he worked to spread the chief's narrative. "Have you heard?" he murmured to a woman buying yams. "They found charms near Okonkwo's compound." "Adaobi's charms. She's been working with the witch in the forest." The woman's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "I wouldn't lie about something so serious," Nwaifa replied, his voice grave. "The gods will punish us all if we don't act." By midday, the rumors had reached the riverbanks, where the women gathered to fetch water. A group of young girls who had begun to look up to Adaobi as a symbol of strength now whispered nervously. "Do you think it's true?" one of them asked, her voice barely audible. "It can't be," another replied. "Adaobi is brave, not evil." But what if she really did go to the forest to curse the village? The older women, still bound by the weight of tradition, cast harsh glances at the younger girls. "Stay away from her," one of them warned. "She'll bring ruin to anyone who follows her." By nightfall, the whispers had grown into an uproar. Aguba, sensing his moment, called for an emergency meeting of the elders under the iroko tree. The men sat on their wooden stools, their faces lit by the flickering flames of the torches around them. "This girl has gone too far," Aguba began, his voice dripping with anger. "Not only has she defied me, but she has defied the gods themselves. We cannot allow her to poison this village any longer." Elder Udo, known for his wisdom and calm demeanor, frowned. "Do you have proof of these accusations, Chief Aguba?" "The girl has caused unrest, yes, but witchcraft is a grave charge." Aguba motioned to Nwaifa, who stepped forward with a clay pot wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a mixture of herbs and ashes. "This was found near her family's compound," Nwaifa said. "A charm, made with the help of the forest witch." The elders murmured among themselves, some nodding, others looking uncertain. "You see," Aguba continued, "she has been consorting with dark forces. If we do not act, the gods will punish us all." Udo held up a hand to silence the crowd. "If this is true, we must hear it from Adaobi herself. Summon her to the square tomorrow." The news reached Adaobi that night, delivered by a young boy who had overheard the elders' conversation. He found her sitting by the river, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders as she watched the moonlight dance on the water. "They're calling for you," the boy said, his voice trembling. "The elders. Chief Aguba said you're a witch." Adaobi's heart sank, but she kept her expression calm. "Thank you for telling me," she said, handing the boy a piece of dried meat from her pouch. "Go home and don't worry. I'll be fine." Moments later, Obi emerged from the shadows, his spear resting against his shoulder. "You're not going alone tomorrow," he said firmly. "I have to," Adaobi replied. "This is my fight." Obi shook his head. "No, it's not just yours anymore. People are starting to see the truth, but they're scared. If you stand alone, they'll believe the lies. You need to show them that you're not afraid and that you have people who stand with you." Adaobi hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Obi." The village square was packed by the time the sun rose. The elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions stern. Chief Aguba stood to one side, his face a mask of righteous indignation. Adaobi arrived with Obi and Chike at her side, their presence a silent testament to her growing support. "Adaobi, daughter of Nzi Okonkwo," the chief elder began, his voice heavy with authority. "You have been accused of witchcraft, of consorting with dark forces to bring harm to this village. What do you say to these charges? I deny them, Adaobi said, her voice clear and unwavering. I have done no harm to this village. I have only spoken the truth. Aguba stepped forward, holding the clay pot in his hands. And what of this? He demanded. A charm found near your compound. Will you deny that it belongs to you? Adaobi hesitated, recognizing the pot immediately as the charm given to her by Neka. It was given to me, she said. For protection, not for harm. Protection from what? Aguba sneered. From the gods you have angered. The crowd murmured, and Adaobi felt the weight of their fear pressing down on her. But before she could respond, Obi stepped forward. This is no proof of witchcraft, Obi said, his voice steady and commanding. The gods do not need charms and herbs to do their will. If the gods were angry with Adaobi, they would strike her down themselves. But look at her. She stands here, unbroken, because she speaks the truth. The crowd buzzed with uncertainty. Some nodded in agreement, while others still looked fearful. Aguba, sensing his grip slipping, raised his voice. She has bewitched you all, he shouted. This is how witches work. They twist the minds of the weak and turn them against their own people. Obi turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over them. Ask yourselves this. Has Adaobi ever harmed you? Has she ever spoken lies? Or is it men like Chief Aguba, who use fear to control you, who are the real threat? Adaobi stepped forward, her voice rising above the murmurs. I do not stand here to destroy our traditions, she said. I stand here to save them. The gods do not demand our suffering. They do not demand that we live in fear. It is men like Chief Aguba who twist their will for their own gain. The square fell silent, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Even the elders seemed taken aback. The chief elder raised his hand. Enough. We have heard the accusations and the defense. The council will deliberate. As the elders conferred, the crowd waited in tense anticipation. Aguba's face was a mask of barely contained rage, while Obi stood tall beside Adaobi, his presence a silent promise of protection. When the elders returned, the chief elder addressed the crowd. Adaobi, we find no evidence that you have practiced witchcraft. However, your actions have caused division in our village. You are free, but you must prove that your words can bring unity, not chaos. The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered, while others murmured their disapproval. Aguba stormed away, his plans foiled once again. That night, Adaobi gathered with her supporters by the river. The glow of lanterns lit their faces as they spoke of the day's events. We're stronger than we were yesterday, Adaobi said. But this is just the beginning. If we want real change, we have to keep fighting. The group nodded, their resolve strengthening. Even Chaik, who had once been hesitant to involve himself, now spoke with conviction. Aguba won't stop, but neither will we. In his compound, Aguba sat alone, his mind racing with fury and desperation. He had failed to turn the village against Adaobi, and now his authority was slipping. She's gaining power, he muttered to himself. If the elders won't act, I'll take matters into my own hands. He summoned Nwaifa, his expression dark. Bring me the men. If we can't silence her with words, we'll silence her with fire. The days following Adaobi's acquittal in movement. Though the elders had not openly supported her rebellion, they had refused to punish her, and that was enough to give her followers hope. But beneath the surface of Umudike, anger and resentment simmered. Chief Aguba, humiliated and desperate, retreated to his compound to plot his next move. For the first time in his life, his control over the village had been challenged. His wealth, his power, and his pride had been dealt a devastating blow. But Aguba was not a man to accept defeat. If the elders would not act against Adaobi, he would. On a moonless night, Aguba gathered his most trusted allies in the shadows of his compound. The air was thick with tension, the flickering flames of their torches casting long, ominous shadows against the mud walls. Nwaifa stood closest to Aguba, his expression nervous. He had failed once to carry out the chief's orders, and he knew there would be no room for failure again. Around them were 7 other men, hunters, farmers, and laborious, each handpicked by Aguba for their loyalty and willingness to do whatever it took to curry favor. "We have been patient," Aguba began, his voice low but sharp. "Too patient. This girl has turned our people against us. She mocks our traditions, humiliates our council, and sows chaos in our village. If we do not act now, everything we have built will crumble." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Aguba continued, his eyes narrowing. "The elders are weak. They fear the gods, but I do not. The gods do not punish the strong, they reward them. And I will prove it." Nuefa cleared his throat, stepping forward cautiously. "What is your plan, Chief?" Aguba's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We strike her where it hurts most. Her family. Her home. Burn Okonkwo's compound. Let her see the consequences of defying me." There was a murmur of agreement, though some of the men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young farmer named Ikena, hesitated. "Chief, the village will know it was us." "The elders." "The elders will do nothing," Aguba snapped. "And even if they do, it will be too late. By the time the flames die down, Adaobi's spirit will be broken." The men fell silent, their loyalty outweighing their fear. Aguba nodded, satisfied. "We move tomorrow night. Be ready." The next day, Adaobi sat by the river with Obi and a small group of her closest allies. The air was cool, the water shimmering under the sunlight, but the mood was tense. The group had been meeting here in secret for weeks, strategizing ways to build their resistance and protect themselves against Aguba's relentless schemes. Chike arrived late, his expression grim. He carried a small bundle of firewood on his shoulder, but his steps were heavy. "Something's wrong," he said as he approached. "I overheard Nuefa and his men in the market. They were talking about a plan, something about fire and the compound." Adaobi's heart sank. "They're going after our home." Obi, who had been sharpening his spear, stood abruptly. "We can't let that happen. If Aguba destroys your family's compound, it will send a message to the entire village." "He wants to break me," Adaobi said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "But he doesn't understand. I'm not afraid of him." "We'll stand guard tonight," Obi said firmly. "Chike, gather as many men as you can trust. Adaobi, stay close to your family. We'll be ready." As the sun set over Umudike, the village grew quiet. The usual sounds of laughter and conversation were replaced by an eerie stillness. At Nzi Okonkwo's compound, Adaobi's family gathered inside, their faces etched with worry. Okonkwo himself sat silently in the corner, his pride wounded by his daughter's rebellion and the chaos it had brought to his household. Yet even he could not deny the growing danger. "This is your doing," he muttered, his voice low but bitter. "You have brought this upon us." Adaobi knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Papa, I know you're angry. But I will protect this family. I won't let Aguba destroy us." Her father said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor. Outside, Obi and Chike moved quietly among the young men they had gathered to guard the compound. There were 15 of them in total, armed with machetes, spears, and wooden clubs. They positioned themselves strategically, hiding in the shadows but ready to strike at the first sign of danger. Obi glanced toward the compound, his eyes narrowing. "Whatever happens, we hold the line." Chike nodded. "We won't let him win." The night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Nuefa and his men crept toward the compound, their torches hidden beneath their cloaks. They moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. As they reached the perimeter of the compound, Nuefa signaled for his men to spread out. They began dousing the ground and the walls of the huts with oil, their movements swift and precise. But just as one of them struck a match, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Obi stepped out of the shadows, his spear glinting in the faint light of the torches. "Drop it," he commanded, his voice cold. Nuefa froze, his eyes widening. "You shouldn't have interfered, Hunter." "Neither should you," Obi replied, his grip tightening on his spear. "Leave now, and no one gets hurt." More figures emerged from the darkness, Chike and the other young men, their weapons raised. They formed a protective circle around the compound, their expressions hard and unyielding. Nwaifa glanced at his men, his confidence faltering. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Aguba won't forget this." "Neither will we," Chike said. "Go back to him and tell him we're not afraid." For a moment, it seemed as though Nwaifa might fight, but the numbers were not in his favor. He signaled for his men to retreat, their torches extinguished as they disappeared into the night. By morning, the village was alive with rumors of the failed attack. Some praised Obi and Chike for their bravery, while others warned of the consequences of defying Aguba. Adaobi, however, felt a mix of relief and determination. "They'll come again," she said as she stood with Obi and Chike near the river. "Aguba won't stop until he destroys me." "Then we'll be ready," Obi replied. "But you need to take this fight to him. Show the village that his power is crumbling." Adaobi nodded. "It's time we stopped reacting and started acting. We need to show them that we're not just fighting against Aguba, we're fighting for a better future." Back in his compound, Aguba raged. The failure of the attack had only deepened his humiliation, and now the whispers of his waning power were louder than ever. "You failed me again," he snarled at Nwaifa, who knelt before him. "A group of boys stopped you. Do you realize what this makes me look like?" "Chief, they were prepared," Nwaifa said, his voice trembling. "They knew we were coming." "Then we'll hit them harder," Aguba said, his eyes narrowing. "If they want a war, I'll give them one." As Aguba plotted his next move, Adaobi's resistance grew stronger. More young men and women joined her cause, their courage fueled by the stories of her defiance. They met in secret by the river, their voices united in determination. "We're not just fighting Aguba," Adaobi said, addressing the group one evening. "We're fighting for all of us, for our right to choose our own paths, to live without fear. If we stand together, he cannot break us." Her words ignited a fire in their hearts, and they vowed to protect one another and their shared vision for a better Umudike. Though Adaobi had won this battle, she knew the war was far from over. Aguba's desperation made him dangerous, and his next move would be more ruthless than ever. But Adaobi was no longer afraid. With Obi, Chike, and her growing movement by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The village of Umudike was restless. Whispers of Chief Aguba's failed schemes and Adaobi's growing movement filled the air. The once unchallenged traditions that governed their lives were now questioned openly, and the courage Adaobi inspired spread beyond the young women. Farmers, hunters, and even some elders began to consider a future no longer dictated by fear. But with each step toward change, Aguba's fury deepened. He had been humiliated, outsmarted, and openly defied. His grip on the village was slipping, and he would not let it go without a final, desperate act. Adaobi sat by the river, watching the water ripple under the late afternoon sun. The growing movement she led was gaining strength, but the burden of leadership weighed heavily on her. The fear of retaliation hung over her like a storm cloud, and while she remained outwardly strong, her moments of solitude revealed the cracks in her armor. Obi approached quietly, as he often did, carrying his spear and an air of quiet confidence. He sat beside her, his presence steadying as always. "You're thinking too much," he said. Adaobi smiled faintly. "It's hard not to." "You've done more than anyone thought possible," Obi continued. "You've given people hope. That's more powerful than anything Aguba can do." Adaobi turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Hope is dangerous. It makes people bold, and that makes them targets." Obi reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Hope also makes people strong. And you're not doing this alone anymore. We're with you." Adaobi's heart softened. She had always admired Obi's unwavering support, but in this moment, she saw something more in him, an anchor in the storm, a partner in her fight. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't say it enough." "You don't have to," Obi replied, his voice steady. "Just don't forget that you're not alone." In his compound, Aguba paced furiously. The whispers of Adaobi's movement had reached him, and he knew his authority was slipping further with each passing day. He summoned Nwaifa and the few loyal men who remained by his side. "She's turning them against me," Aguba snarled. "Even the elders are starting to question my authority. If we don't act now, I'll lose everything." "What do you wish to do, Chief?" Nuefa asked, though his tone lacked the confidence it once held. Aguba's eyes burned with desperation. We'll call for a final council meeting. I'll demand her exile, and if the elders refuse, I'll take matters into my own hands. Nuefa hesitated. And if the village stands with her? Aguba leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. Then we'll show them what happens when they defy me. The council meeting was announced the following day, and the village square filled with people long before the appointed hour. The elders sat in their usual semicircle, their faces grim but curious. Aguba arrived with his men, his expression cold and calculating. Adaobi arrived with her supporters, their presence a stark contrast to Aguba's oppressive entourage. Obi and Chike stood on either side of her, their loyalty clear for all to see. The chief elder raised his hand to call for silence. We have gathered here to resolve the growing unrest in our village. Chief Aguba has called for this meeting. Let him speak. Aguba stepped forward, his voice loud and commanding. Elders, people of Umudike, we stand at a crossroads. Our traditions, the very foundation of our lives, are under attack. This girl, Adaobi, has sown discord and turned our people against their heritage. If we do not act, she will destroy everything we hold sacred. Adaobi stepped forward, her voice calm but powerful. I have not destroyed anything. I have only spoken the truth that our traditions should not be used to oppress or control. The gods do not demand our suffering, and they do not punish those who seek freedom. The crowd murmured, their reactions mixed. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uneasy. Aguba sneered. You twist the truth to suit your rebellion. But I have served this village for years, and I will not stand by while you destroy it. Served the village? Adaobi said, her tone sharp. You have served only yourself, Aguba. You have used fear to control us, but that fear ends today. The chief elder raised his hand again. Enough. We have heard both sides. The council will deliberate. As the elders conferred, the tension in the square was palpable. Aguba's face was a mask of barely concealed rage, while Adaobi stood tall, her supporters gathered behind her. The chief elder finally spoke. The council has decided. Adaobi, your words have inspired many, but they have also caused division. We will not exile you, but we will revisit our traditions to ensure they serve all of our people. The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Aguba's face twisted with fury, but before he could speak, a voice from the crowd shouted, We stand with Adaobi. Another voice joined in, then another, until the square was filled with chants of support. Freedom. Justice. We stand with Adaobi. Aguba's men began to back away, their confidence shaken by the sheer force of the crowd's unity. Even Nuefa looked uneasy, his loyalty wavering. As the crowd dispersed, Aguba returned to his compound, his desperation reaching a breaking point. That night, he gathered his remaining men and gave them a final order: destroy Adaobi and her movement, no matter the cost. But Adaobi and her allies were prepared. When Aguba's men arrived at the river, they were met with resistance, dozens of young men and women armed with courage and determination. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Aguba's men fled, their spirits broken, leaving the chief isolated and defeated. The next morning, the village woke to a new reality. Aguba's power was gone, his influence shattered by the unity of the people. The elders, inspired by Adaobi's courage, began to re-examine the traditions that had governed their lives for generations. Adaobi, now a symbol of hope and change, stood by the river with Obi and Chike. The sun rose behind them, casting a warm glow over the water. We did it, Chike said, his voice filled with pride. No, Adaobi replied, her gaze steady. We began it. The real work starts now. Obi stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Adaobi turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper. Thank you, Obi. For everything. He smiled. Always. In the weeks that followed, Adaobi and Obi grew closer, their bond forged in the fires of their shared struggle. Their love became a beacon of hope for the village, a reminder that even in the face of oppression, unity and courage could create something beautiful. As the village began to heal and rebuild, Adaobi's story spread beyond Umudike, inspiring other villages to question their own traditions and embrace change. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Adaobi knew one thing for sure: she was no longer alone.